in a period of my life where I lived in Los Angeles. I stayed with some very gracious and very fun friends in Santa Monica. These were kind of web developer artist types, just absolutely brilliant, so gracious and hospitable. And I'd been staying with them for a time. They'd invited me to come down from the Bay Area where I was living at the time to do music. And I had never taken music too seriously, but at this point in my life, I'd finished school and was ready to try something different. I didn't, see a path ahead for me that seemed to have substance or meaning or heart. As Carlos Castaneda says, basically ask yourself one question: does this path have heart? And if the answer is yes, it's of use to you. Well, considering my other options, this was the one with heart. And so I went and stayed with them for a time, and we recorded music. And I was sort of back and forth between Western Colorado and Los Angeles. I couldn't really afford to live in Los Angeles and rent my own place. And so, I was kind of under the delusion that my art would pay for my life fairly rapidly. And honestly, what paid for my life was the hospitality of some good friends who I still adore to this day. In any case, as I was going back and forth, I spent quite a bit of time on a farm that my parents had sort of purchased as like a retirement home, a place to live in retirement. And they needed somebody to kind of tend to it. And being sort of in between things, I would go stay there for a time. And I had a piano and a couch and a bed that I put in this old 1904 farmhouse. And I would just play music and write songs and record. And I was very serious about it. When I wasn't doing that, I would work here and there on a peach orchard, picking peaches or packing peaches, or picking hops, and did various things, a little bit of building. And but I also had quite a bit of time for rumination, quite a bit of hours of repose and sort of listlessness. And in that period, I spent a lot of time at my aunt and uncle's home because they lived nearby this house that my folks had purchased. And they had 3 children, Logan, Matilda, and Destry. And Destry was an angel. She was, all of their children are just fantastic. But for whatever reason, Destry liked me. And it's hard not to... It's hard not to have an affinity for somebody who admires you so much. And at the time, I couldn't really understand why, but I loved it, and I loved her. And she was, at the time it was from about the time she was 2 to 4 years old, and just a lovely, creative juggernaut. I mean, she was just like this explosion of ideas. And we would sit together in the mornings. I would go over for coffee, and Aaron and Joel would cook me farm fresh eggs from the chickens that are wandering around on their property. And I'd have a couple eggs, a piece of homemade, toast from homemade bread. And then I would sit with Destry and we'd draw and we'd talk about things. And, she'd say all these wonderful things like, I asked her one time, what do you envision doing, later? I was just curious, of course, because we always, we all contemplate that, and it's very seldom that any of us do the thing, become a fireman, become a, whatever it is that you dreamed as a child. And she said, I want to be, I'm going to be an artist. And I said, well, what sort of art do you want to do? And she said, I'll figure it out. At 4 years old, she said this to me, I'll figure it out. Brilliant. She was just such a delight, and really an inspiration. And in any case, I would spend time in the mornings doing this with her, and playing music, and it was just a formative time in my life. But I'd also go back to Los Angeles, and there was a period where some of the music that we had made was getting our foot in the door, and we were playing some shows. We played Sunset, and we were booked to play, I think, a venue at UCLA and some kind of bigger venues. We were playing some places in Santa Monica, and things were going pretty well. And Destry had been born with a congenital heart defect. Basically, one of the valves in her heart had sort of faulty connective tissue, and sort of a rare genetic disorder. In fact, I think they actually sort of think that maybe it's what Frank Mayshow, my great-grandfather, could have had. If not that, then some sort of undiagnosed congenital heart defect. And so she would, on occasion, become very sick. And essentially from the time that she was born, we knew that we didn't necessarily have a long lease with her. And but that made it all the more sweet in some ways, as bitter, but also just like more rich. And we cherished things a bit more, I think, with her. Anyway, I was in Los Angeles when I got a call from Destry's mother, and she said, Destry they're saying that she needs to go into heart surgery soon at Children's Hospital in Denver, and we'd like you, Destry has asked for you to be there. And of course I dropped everything I was doing, and I left for Colorado and traveled with them to the Children's Hospital. All of us, Aaron and Joel and myself and Destry, Logan. I can't remember. I think maybe Matilda stayed with Duna and Jack, my grandparents, and my sister, and we all went. And in the sort of pre-surgery consultation the day before, one of the eminent heart surgeons of the entire world sat with us and his team, and or select members of the team, and talked about what would go down, and he explained with kind of no amount of uncertainty that her survival rate was something like 98.5%. I mean, it sort of amazed me even at the time that there could be a metric for something like that you could quantify, like the probability that someone would survive an invasive surgery. But he spoke with assurance, and we, sometimes you just have to defer to the better judgment of experts. I mean, in this case, nobody else could perform heart surgery, so the best heart surgeon in the world would do. So I won't go into the details of it, but essentially, because it's still traumatic and still in some ways compartmentalized, but essentially, Destry died after an 11-hour surgery, and we were with her, and it was the most painful thing that I've ever experienced. And it's been 13 years, and I see her sister now, Matilda, who's just this wonderful, bright, shining light. And I'm so impressed by her. She's brilliant. She read a poem recently at our grandmother's service, at Duna's service, Frank's daughter, that floored me. I mean, I hadn't cried in the service, and she read a poem about wanting to be as strong as her grandmother. and it was so good. She's a genius. I mean, it's brilliant. I can't help when I look at her to think about who Destry would be, what she'd be like. So after her death, I canceled all of our shows and said, I can't do this anymore. I quit doing art. I have a song lyric about this very moment that said, and I swore I would never make a single thing again. I swore I would never make a single thing again in a world where it can be taken away. And I decided to abandon art and abandon music and abandon friendships, and I went into a pretty dark night of the soul. For a long time I drank too much, said yes to every drug, slept alone, and wandered off into the night, often threw my shoes on a wire in Chicago, walked barefoot in the streets in a huge storm, swam Lac du Flambeau, went and saw Yayoi Kusama with my friend Meredith in Soho, traveled to White Sands and looked into the desert and countless things. I mean, I was just traveling and just searching for the answer. I cursed God many times on my knees, staring at the sky. And I was in a great deal of pain to think that we could have this existence that's so beautiful, and that somebody so pure and so of such beauty and creative, potency could be snatched up like that. And in any case, I was lost. But at some point, I made it back to Los Angeles, and I was just a mess. I mean, honestly, I think I was, to be fair, I think I was a little divergent, or, kind of having some social, some dysmorphia, and maybe some magical thinking from grieving, which I guess they say is part of the process. And my friends who had been so gracious before still were, but they also didn't really understand what I was going through. And so I got out there and had a few spats, is the best I can describe. And I have to say that this period of my life is very unclear. I mean, it's some of it I remember like it's yesterday, and some of it seems like such a bizarre dream, and I'm not sure, sort of what's real. But one thing that happened in this time is I spent a lot of time in the street. I spent a lot of time walking the promenade and walking on Ocean Boulevard. And walking down Wilshire, clear down to the overlook of the ocean, and walking along the fence. And there's so many people on the street in Los Angeles. It's hard if you're walking around like that all the time. You meet the people on the street, the unhoused, the many people who live in the margins. And somehow I met this young man who was a Crip, a young Crip. He asked me to call him Little Brother, and that's what I'll refer to him as. So Little Brother and I kind of teamed up, and we just had this affinity. We would walk all over. We'd freestyle. We'd go see if somebody had a little weed and roll like a French spliff, and go get, I'd get a coffee, and we'd just go sit by the ocean. We'd go find people to play volleyball with, and then we'd go try to scrounge some food. And we walked for miles and miles together for many days. And we talked about life, and he told me his story and I told him mine. And his story was that he had been released from prison, I think from like a fairly significant charge, maybe attempted murder or burglary or something like that, which he claimed, and I truly believe him, that he was innocent of. So he was sort of imprisoned in the way that many people of color are, for something that he didn't do, and he was trapped in the system, and he had been assaulted by one of the prison security guards with a baton. I mean, he'd been beaten almost to death, and I guess they had decided that instead of paying him millions and millions of dollars, they just figured out a way to let him back out. So when I met him, he had like just recovered from this horrendous beating, and I don't know, he was sort of way out of his zone. He was kind of more from like Watts, or he was from a different part of Los Angeles. And if you know Los Angeles, that's a far cry from Santa Monica. So I think he had taken the bus down Wilshire or something from downtown, or I don't know. But we had linked up and spent many days telling each other stories and rapping and just like doing like graffiti. I was sort of doing this like tribute to Basquiat at the time. I was doing chalk art, and so there was this huge wall as you come away from a view of the ocean, and I wrote on it in chalk, I said, "Turn around, leave the city, oh holy ocean." And I don't know, I knew at that point I'd met like a bunch of the drug dealers and stuff that hung out down there near the boardwalk and sold drugs to tourists, and just kind of hung out, and some kind of hard characters. And one of them came up to me like a few days later and said people are stopping and taking photos of that because they think it's interesting. And so that was kind of cool, but it was all sort of an homage to Basquiat, and I'd been kind of obsessed with the film from the 90s. And Basquiat was on my mind a lot, and I was just kind of doing chalk art. So little brother and I would do chalk art. Every once in a while I kind of like try to rope him into things that like my other friends were doing. So we'd go to like a concert in Los Feliz or something, some underground like independent noise artist or something. I don't know, just bizarre things like that. And we'd go like walk into art galleries, and we would just do interesting things. We were very free. Both of us sort of had nothing to lose. And one night we were at this place just off of Main Street, 3rd, I think. It was a coffee shop that was open 24 hours a day called Guru's. It was really crazy because like screenwriters and actors and and then just like transients and stuff would be hanging out. It was very bohemian. It was like a true bohemian cafe still, and up, 24 hours a day. So took little brother there. It was like, I have to take you to my favorite spot. We went and got coffee and food and sat and smoked a spliff out front. And we were sitting there, and these two Russian, kind of like Russian mafia type dudes pull up. I don't know where from. I mean, maybe they're walking in from, maybe they'd parked their car, maybe they're handling some business or something, but they walked up, they saw us. I think little brother had like scored some weed and he was trying to sell, and these guys came up and they kind of approached us like that we were out of our zone, and we needed to fuck on off. And they didn't come nice. I mean, they were kind of about being in our face and like really about it. And so I pulled them aside somehow, recognizing that we were like sort of in imminent danger. And I told him a story. I told him a story because they were Russian. And growing up, one of my favorite friends that I've ever had was Mikhail Mikhailovich Grigoriev, who is somebody that I played sports with growing up and knew when he was like seriously just from Russia. And his cousin Genya, who I had known, had come up to me and said, "Will you please be friends with Misha? Everybody's making fun of him because of how he wears his swimsuit." Because in Russia, they wear their swimsuits a little bit differently, apparently. But anyway, I was like, yeah, sure. So Misha and I became very good friends in the hood, in an area of Albuquerque called the War Zone. And Misha was tough. He was like he grew up like very hood, like in an era of Russia in St. Petersburg where like the mafia would still come collect money from your family. And if you didn't pay, you were in trouble, you know. And he was like in a chain gang and smoking cigarettes when he was like 6 years old, you know. So when the cholos came to fuck with him or anybody came to try to fuck with him, they tried to beat him up because he was different in the locker room one time. And there's this story. There's like Misha was kind of a legend. It was like he took on like 3 or 4 people fighting in some kind of Russian street fighting style. I forget the name of it, but he basically kicked their ass, and then nobody fucked with him. And he was a badass, and he was also a delight. And I think he's like a physicist now or a mathematician. He was fucking brilliant, and he lives in Los Angeles. But anyway, Misha had told me a story when we were kids about how his brother Grisha and he had, before the wall fell down and they were still living in the USSR, and it was just before the regime change. And so in their neighborhood, as soon as the regime changed, they had put up a Snickers billboard in his neighborhood, which was, you know, very different from what they were used to. Some sleek American Snickers ad. And Grisha and Misha were, of course, you know, they were taken with it, as we all were with any advertisement that sold us fucking high fructose corn sugar in chocolate form, you know. So they were like, we're gonna get one of those, and they spent months collecting cans in the hood so that they could go recycle them and get enough money to buy one Snickers bar. Well, they did this for months and months and months, and it was one night, Grisha, or one day, I guess, Grisha went to go do something, and Misha sat looking at the cans, and he contemplated the Snickers bar and the big billboard and the sleek American, you know, capitalist imagery. And he decided, I'm going to go turn these cans in and I'm going to get a Snickers bar. And so he went and grabbed up all the cans and he turned them in and he got the money and he went and bought the Snickers bar. And then, you know, he didn't eat it right away. He sat and contemplated for a minute, like, should I do this? I mean, Grisha helped me and we should really share this. But in the end, he took a bite, he unwrapped it, he unwrapped this sleek package, this sleek, shiny package from a foreign land, a land of promise, a land of, you know, professional sports and big icons and movie stars, and he wanted to take a bite, and he took one bite, and then he took another, and then he took another, and then he took another, and it was gone. And he sat with a kind of like dopamine-induced high and relished it, truly. But he said he felt one of, you know, the most remorse he'd ever felt for betraying his brother shortly after. This is the story I told these Russian mafia members. And what the man said to me, what one of these 2 large Russian men said to me was, "You've touched my heart. I will let you two go. Please leave this neighborhood. You're outside your zone." And little brother and I picked up our stuff, what little we had, and walked out into the night and to the beach. And we looked up at the stars and we talked about gratitude for being alive, even though everything we'd been through, even though we were so desperate and hungry, even though we live in a world so cold that can seem so unfair. In my life, in my story, in my grieving for Destry, in my encounters with death, in my betrayals, in my, desperate yearning for that sleek capitalist bite, I'm thankful now for the growth I've had, and I recognize that the pain and suffering was necessary. I think about little brother sometimes, and I think I hope he is too, and I hope he's okay.